They say Stull, Kansas, is one of the 7 gateways to hell. I didn't believe that. Not until I took a job here as the new gravekeeper. My predecessor left me a notebook filled with strange rules. Rules I thought were just old cemetery tales. But on my first night, I learned why you never break them. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and if you love true disturbing horror stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and keep your lights low for this one, because tonight we're heading deep into Stull Cemetery. The call came in just after dawn, one of those chilly October mornings when the mist still clings low to the fields. The county supervisor's voice was thin over the phone, rushed. "Positions open again out at Stull," he said. "Caretaker job. You interested?" I remember pausing, staring at the frost gathering on my window. Again, that word stuck with me. But I needed the work, and caretaking graveyards had never bothered me. So I said yes. By the time I reached Douglas County, the sun was bleeding through a blanket of fog. The road narrowed into a dirt lane flanked by cracked stone walls and bare trees clawing at the gray sky. The sign at the turnoff read Stull Cemetery, Est 1857. The letters were half rusted away, like even the name itself was trying to disappear. As I stepped out of my truck, the air hit me, dry, cold, and heavy with the smell of limestone dust and old hayfields. You could taste it, that kind of scent that clings to your clothes, like something ancient trying to remind you it's still here. The gate creaked when I pushed it open. Not just a squeak. It was a drawn-out groan, like it didn't want to move. I had to put my shoulder into it. And the strangest thing? When it finally gave, I swear I heard a second gate echo behind it, somewhere deeper inside the cemetery. There he was, a single man standing by the caretaker's shed. He looked like he'd been carved straight out of the Kansas wind. Heavy coat, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, hands rough and cracked like dry bark. "You must be the new one," he said, voice gravelly. "Name's Earl. Don't get too comfortable." At first I thought he was joking, but he didn't smile. Not even a flicker. The man looked tired. The kind of tired that lives in the bones, not the body. His eyes were bloodshot but sharp, like he hadn't slept in weeks, yet still saw everything. He handed me a small ring of keys. Gate, shed, crypt. Don't mix 'em up. Then he hesitated, thumb resting on the last key, a tarnished brass one marked with a faded X. "This one," he said quietly, "you don't use unless you have to. And if you do, make sure the bell's not ringing." I didn't know what he meant, but his tone, low, measured, final, told me not to ask. I followed him up the narrow gravel path that cut through the cemetery. The grass was long and silver in the wind, bending like waves. Some of the headstones leaned sideways, others were split down the middle from frost. The older ones had names so worn you couldn't read them anymore, just soft impressions of lives that used to matter. We passed a small stone church at the hill's crest, roof sagging, door chained shut. Its windows were blacked out, like eyes covered in mourning. "That's off limits," Earl muttered. "Don't go near it after sundown." Again, I tried to lighten the mood. "You're not making this place sound too welcoming." He just looked at me. "It ain't." He stopped by the caretaker's cabin, a single-room shack with peeling paint and a chimney coughing faint smoke. "Everything you need's inside," he said. "Logs, tools, old records. Keep the grounds clean, gates locked by dusk, and don't answer the bell." I laughed a little under my breath, thinking it was some old caretaker superstition. But his face didn't change. He was dead serious. "The bell?" I asked. He didn't look at me, just said, "You'll know it when you hear it." He turned then, walking toward the road. The crunch of his boots on gravel faded slow, each step sounding heavier than the last. He didn't look back. Not once. When I finally stepped into the cabin, the air smelled of smoke and mildew. The walls were lined with shelves of old ledgers, maps, and a single oil lamp still warm. Someone had been there recently, maybe this morning. On the table sat a folded piece of paper, my name written across the front in shaky handwriting. I opened it. It wasn't a welcome note. It was a list. A list of rules. But that came later. That first night, all I could think about was the way Earl's voice cracked when he said, "Don't get too comfortable." Because standing in that cabin, listening to the wind scrape across the stones outside, I had the distinct, almost sickening, feeling that the cemetery was already awake. And it knew my name. He didn't shake my hand, didn't even try. Just gave me that quiet, steady look, the kind that tells you a man's seen too much and doesn't bother explaining it anymore. The kind of look that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. "Come on," Earl said, motioning me toward the small shack beside the graves. His boots made a slow, crunching sound on the gravel. "Might as well see where you'll be sleeping." The shack was older than it looked from the road. The wood was gray and dry, eaten thin by wind and time. The hinges whined when he opened the door. Inside, there wasn't much. A cot, an oil lamp, a rusted stove that looked like it hadn't been lit in years. And on the table, right in the center, was a notebook bound in cracked leather. Earl slid it across the table. Didn't say a word at first, just waited until I picked it up. The leather was soft, almost damp. And when I opened the first page, I saw handwriting that didn't belong to just one person. Different inks, different hands. Some neat, some frantic. "These are the rules," Earl said finally. His voice dropped lower. "You follow 'em, you'll last. You don't..." He tapped the table once. "This ground takes what it's owed." I half smiled, thinking he was trying to scare me. Old caretaker superstition, maybe. But when I looked up, his face hadn't changed. His eyes were steady and cold, like he was remembering something. "Come on, Earl," I said. "I've worked graveyards before. I think I'll manage." He struck a match and lit his pipe. The flame flickered against the walls, making the shadows move. Too slowly, like they were thinking about catching up. "You ever work this one?" he asked. I didn't answer. He took a long drag from his pipe, exhaled, and leaned back in the chair. "Midnight here ain't like anywhere else, you'll see." There was something about the way he said midnight that got under my skin. Not just a word, a warning. The kind that makes you want to check your watch and count the hours left until dark. I flipped through a few more pages of the book, trying to look casual. Each line started with a number, written like commandments. But the words didn't make much sense. Rule 1, never leave the gate open after dusk. Rule 2, if you hear the bell, don't look toward it. Rule 3, the woman by the church isn't real. I stopped at that one, looked up. "What's this about a woman?" I asked. Earl's hand twitched just a little, enough to notice. "Don't worry about her," he said. "Just don't speak if you see her." He said it like he'd seen her himself. The wind picked up outside, carrying a long, low whistle through the cracks in the wood. The kerosene lamp flickered, dimmed, then came back to life. I could smell the oil burning, the faint sweetness of his pipe tobacco, and something else beneath it. Something sour, like turned soil. "You said the last caretaker retired," I said carefully. "That true?" Earl looked at me for a long time, then smiled without humor. "That's what the county wrote down." He stood and pulled his coat tighter. He didn't last long enough to write any new rules. He started for the door, stopped with his hand on the latch. "You'll hear things at night. Wind, maybe footsteps. Don't answer none of it. And if you get that feeling someone's behind you, don't turn around." "Why?" I asked. He looked at me from under the brim of his hat. "Because if you turn around," he said, "it means you already waited too long." Then he opened the door and stepped outside. The wind rushed in, blowing the pages of the notebook open on their own, a dry rustling sound, like whispers. I watched him walk away down the path, his figure fading into the fog. When he disappeared, I looked back at the book. The pages had stopped fluttering. one left open by chance. Or maybe not. At the bottom, scrawled in handwriting so faint I almost missed it, were 3 words: "It watches first." The lamp hissed once, and the light dimmed again. I don't know why, but for the first time that night, I locked the door, and from somewhere deep in the graveyard carried on that Kansas wind. I could have sworn I heard a faint, distant bell. That night, after Earl left, I sat alone in the shack with nothing but the sound of the wind scraping the eaves and the lantern hissing low. The notebook lay in front of me, that cracked leather cover looking almost alive in the light, the pages curling like they were breathing. I told myself I'd just skim through it. Curiosity, that's all. But once I started reading, I couldn't stop. Every page was written in the same careful hand, neat, deliberate, but pressed too hard, like whoever wrote it wanted the words to stick. The first rule hit me strange. Never dig after sundown. Simple enough, I thought. But the note underneath said, "The ground shifts at night. You won't hear it, but it hears you." I kept reading. "If you hear knocking from below, fill the hole and walk away." There was a dark smudge beside that one, maybe a fingerprint. I ran my thumb across it and felt something dry flake away. Not ink, something else. Then came the third. At midnight, the gate must stay open exactly 3 inches. No more, no less. That one made me sit back a little. Why 3 inches? Who measures that? And why midnight? I checked the next page. "Never speak the names carved off the stones." The note under it read, "If the name's gone, it's because it's been claimed. Let it stay gone." And then, the one that unsettled me the most. "If you find fresh flowers on an unmarked grave, don't touch them. They're not from the living." My hand went cold holding that page. The lantern flame flickered like something had breathed on it. Outside, the wind had gone still. Too still. You don't realize how much you rely on sound until it's gone. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes, trying to laugh it off. "Small-town superstition," I muttered. "Old men and ghost stories." But deep down, I couldn't shake the way Earl's voice had sounded when he said, "Midnight here ain't like anywhere else." I went back to the notebook. Toward the end, the handwriting began to change. Less steady, more hurried. Some of the lines were slanted, like whoever wrote them did it fast, scared they'd forget. "If the bell rings before dawn, count to 7 before you move. Don't follow the footsteps past the fence. They don't belong to anyone here. If you wake to knocking on the cabin door, stay still. They can't cross the threshold unless you answer." The margins were filled with notes, scribbled thoughts, scratched out warnings, fragments of names. One corner even had something that looked like a map, small dots for headstones, and an X drawn near the old church. I looked out the window toward that hill. Even in the dark, I could make out its silhouette against the cloudy sky. The roof was half collapsed, but the cross still stood. I could have sworn, just for a second, there was a faint glimmer of light from one of the broken windows. I told myself it was moonlight. Just moonlight. I turned back to the book and caught one more line near the bottom of the page. "The rules aren't to protect you from the dead. They're to protect you from what wakes them." My mouth went dry. I closed the book and leaned back in my chair, listening. The silence was thick, pressing in from all sides. Then, somewhere far off, I heard it. A soft, metallic rattle. The sound of the gate chain brushing against the post. The wind hadn't picked up again, and I was sure I'd locked it. I told myself not to go out there, but I did. Lantern in hand, heart hammering against my ribs, I pushed the shack door open. The graveyard stretched out in front of me, pale rows of stones under the thin moonlight. And the gate hung just slightly ajar, maybe 3 inches, exactly. I stood there staring, feeling the cold air move past me like breath. No footsteps, no sound, just the faintest whisper of metal swaying back and forth. I closed the gate tight, double-wrapped the chain, and locked it. When I turned back toward the cabin, I noticed something new. A small pile of flowers at the base of an unmarked stone near the path. Fresh. Still wet with dew. I didn't touch them. When I finally got back inside, I locked the door and set the notebook on the table beside the lamp. The light flickered again. Softer now, almost steady. And that's when I saw it. On the back cover, etched faintly into the leather, barely visible under the soot and age. A single word carved deep enough to scar the hide. Ode. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I believed any of it yet, but because, for the first time, I realized Earl hadn't warned me out of superstition. He'd warned me out of experience. The air changed around 11. Not windy, not even cold, really, just still. The kind of stillness that makes your ears ring because you're waiting for a sound that never comes. The crickets stopped first, then the owls. The whole cemetery just went quiet, like the place was holding its breath. I was sitting at the small table, the notebook still open beside the lamp, half reading, half listening. There's something about silence in a graveyard. It's not peaceful. It's thick. Feels like the ground itself is listening. That's when I heard it. Knock, just one, faint, dull, like a hand under dirt. I froze. Another knock, louder this time, then 3 in a row, steady, deliberate. I told myself it was air pockets. Happens sometimes when you fill a fresh grave, soil settling, gases escaping. But the sound didn't stop. There was a pause. Then a slow scrape, like something wooden rubbing against wood. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, that I was just letting Earl's rules get in my head. But then, there it was again. That dragging sound. Soft, but patient. I grabbed the lantern and stepped outside. The air hit me, dry and sour, like old stone dust. The wind hadn't picked up, but the grass around the grave swayed anyway, like it was breathing with the earth. The fresh plot I'd filled that afternoon sat at the edge of the property, just a simple mound of dirt, marked with a small wooden cross. A John Doe from the county morgue. No family, no service, no one to remember him, and yet someone, or something, was knocking from underneath. The sound was rhythmic now. 3 knocks, silence, 3 more. I stood there listening, the lantern shaking slightly in my hand. My mind tried to reason it out. Moisture, pressure, wildlife. But nothing moved in that dirt. Nothing natural makes that sound. That's when I remembered the rule. If you hear knocking from below, fill the hole and walk away. I didn't have to think twice. I dropped to my knees, grabbed the shovel leaning against the post, and started throwing dirt over the mound. Fast, desperate. The metal of the shovel bit into the soft soil, each toss breaking the stillness like thunder. And underneath, I swear, I felt something shift. Not violently, just a slow push, like something yielding. I didn't stop. I filled it until the ground was level again, until every bit of sound stopped. When I finally stood, my breath came out shaky. The lantern light flickered across the headstones, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement. The faintest shadow near the church at the top of the hill. Something standing just behind the broken door, watching. I blinked. It was gone. I backed away, slow, careful, not turning my back until I reached the cabin. Locked the door, set the shovel against it. I sat there for a long time, listening. Nothing. No knocks, no scraping. Just that awful silence again, like the whole place had gone back to sleep. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, covered in dirt so fine it felt like ash. My fingernails black with soil. I could still smell it. The cold, mineral scent of something freshly disturbed. I tried to laugh, to shake it off. Just settling, I whispered. That's all. But the notebook was still on the table. The page with that rule. It wasn't where I'd left it. It had turned on its own. And now, written at the bottom in a faint, uneven scrawl that I didn't remember seeing before, were 5 new words. Don't let it finish knocking. I closed the book, hard. The lamp hissed once, then steadied. And from outside, right at the edge of hearing, far, far off, I could have sworn I heard the faint jingle of the gate chain, just enough to make me wonder if I'd actually followed the rule in time. Morning came gray and cold. The kind of Kansas morning where the sun never really breaks through. It just hangs there, pale and useless behind a sheet of fog. My hands still ached from shoveling, and I could still smell the dirt under my fingernails. Earl showed up just after sunrise. He didn't knock, just opened the cabin door like he always had a right to. The hinges gave a low groan. He stood there in the doorway for a long second, squinting against the lantern light that was still burning from the night before. He didn't ask how I slept. He didn't need to. "You heard it, didn't you?" I didn't answer at first, but I must have looked it. He smirked, the kind of weary half-smile that never reaches the eyes. "That's why the rule exists," he said, stepping inside. He pulled his pipe from his coat pocket, tamped it with a thumb, and lit it like it was the most natural thing in the world to talk about corpses knocking under your feet. "The dead here." He exhaled a long plume of smoke. "They forget they're gone sometimes." I laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do with the silence. He didn't laugh back. "You'll get used to it," he said finally, "or you'll leave." He turned to go, then stopped near the door. His eyes fell on the notebook sitting open on the table. "You read about the stones yet?" I shook my head. "Good. Don't." He pointed toward the northern edge of the cemetery. "You'll see some with names half gone. Weather did some of it. The rest," he trailed off. "The rest were chiseled off for a reason." I asked what reason, but he didn't answer. Just gave me that same long, empty stare and said, "Best not to say their names aloud. Words wake things." Then he left, same as always, not waiting for a response. I spent most of the day working the lower field, trimming back weeds, clearing brush around the old church fence. Every so often, I'd catch a glint of something out of the corner of my eye. A shimmer, maybe sunlight bouncing off a stone, but when I'd turn to look, it was gone. By dusk, the fog was rolling back in, heavy, dense, the kind that clings to the ground and hides where you're stepping. That's when I saw one. A headstone split clean in half, the top piece leaning against the base. The carving was worn smooth from rain, but in the right light, you could see where the name had been, scraped out deliberately. Chisel marks, deep and angry. Earl's words came back to me. "They forget they're gone sometimes." I told myself to keep walking. I really did. But there's something about forbidden things. Once they're mentioned, they live rent-free in your head. That night, after locking the gate and lighting the lantern, I sat with the notebook again. I found the rule. Never speak the names carved off the stones. Underneath, in that faint handwriting, someone had added, "They listen for it." I didn't know what that meant. Not really. But curiosity has a way of blinding common sense. Around midnight, I went back out. The fog was so thick it muffled my footsteps. The grass was slick under my boots, and every breath came out as white mist. I walked toward that broken headstone, lantern in hand, light barely pushing through the gray. When I reached it, I crouched down and brushed the surface with my fingers. The stone was cold, colder than the air around it. And there, near the bottom, I saw it. Faint letters still visible beneath the scrapes. Just 4 of them. Enough to form half a name. I whispered it, quiet, barely audible. But the moment the sound left my mouth, the air shifted. A low hum rolled through the ground. Not loud, but deep enough that I felt it in my ribs. The lantern flickered once, twice. Then something else. Soft, almost like a sigh, came from behind the stone. It was a whisper. Not words, not exactly. Just a shape of breath that carried meaning without sound. I froze. My knees went weak. The whisper came again, closer this time. My ears rang, and then I saw movement. Faint depressions forming in the grass beside the stone, one after another, like footsteps circling me. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. Back to the cabin, door slammed, bolt locked. I leaned against it, heart hammering, the sound of those unseen steps fading just outside. When I finally dared to look out the window, the fog had thinned a little. I could see the broken stone in the lantern's leftover glow. The half-name I'd whispered was gone now, completely erased, as if it had never existed, and carved freshly into the dirt in front of it were new letters. Mine. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there till dawn, watching the fog creep and listening to the faint scrape of stone against stone, like the cemetery itself was rearranging its memory. That's when I stopped calling it superstition. Because superstition doesn't whisper your name back. The sun never really rose that morning, just bled through the fog like a tired candle. Everything looked pale and washed out, even the stones. I hadn't slept, not after what happened the night before. Every sound still made me twitch. The shifting soil, the creak of the roof beams, even the kettle hissing on the old stove. By noon, I told myself I needed to prove something, that what I saw, or thought I saw, was just exhaustion. That I'd let my nerves and old ghost stories get the better of me. So, I went back out there. The grass was still wet, the fog clinging low over the ground. I walked toward the north section, where the older graves leaned in odd angles, like they were whispering to each other when no one was around. That's where I'd found the broken stone, the one whose name I'd whispered. The air felt heavier there. I noticed the birds avoided the trees near that part of the yard. Even the insects were gone. The grave was half covered in ivy now, like it had aged overnight. I knelt and brushed the leaves back, fingers trembling without meaning to. The surface was rough and cold under my hands. The letters were chipped and worn, but I could still make out fragments. Aeon, Some. That was it. Two halves of a name, barely holding together through time. I stared at it, trying to piece it together. Anne? Summers? Somerton? Something else? It didn't matter. My mind was already finishing it for me. I leaned closer, whispering the name the way I thought it might have sounded once. Soft, careful, like I was handling something fragile. And some... The instant the sound left my lips, the air changed. It wasn't a gust or breeze, it was pressure. Like every ounce of warmth had been pulled from the world, and the sky above had dropped an inch closer to the earth. The ivy froze mid-sway. My breath came out as mist, even though the day wasn't that cold. And then, behind me, something moved. It was small at first, a shuffle. Then the faintest sound of fabric brushing stone. I turned, lantern still in hand, but there was nothing. Just the same endless fog and the black silhouette of the church up on the hill. That's when I heard it. A voice. Soft, low, right behind my ear. It said my name, not yelled, not whispered like a threat, but spoken gently, the way someone might greet you in a room you thought was empty. I froze so hard my knuckles went white around the lantern handle. I could feel the warmth of breath that wasn't mine slide past my cheek. When I finally turned, slow as a dying clock, there was no one there, just the grave and the ivy, swaying like it was still being touched. But the air around me was still. There wasn't a hint of wind. I stepped back, pulse hammering so loud it filled my ears. The lantern flickered, flame bending sideways for no reason at all. And for one split second I caught it. Something pale reflected in the glass. The faint outline of a woman's face. Hollow eyes, lips moving soundlessly. Then it was gone. The ivy stopped moving. The air warmed just a little, like nothing had happened. I looked down at the headstone again. The letters, Anne, Some, were gone. smoothed over like the stone had healed itself. In their place, scratched fresh into the base, was a single word: listen. I stumbled back, nearly dropped the lantern. Every instinct screamed to run. But something in me wouldn't move, like the ground itself was holding me there, waiting. I wanted to call out for Earl, but I knew he wasn't coming. Not for this. He'd warned me. Never speak the names carved off the stones. I'd broken that one. And now, something out here knew mine. I left the grave just as the fog began to close in again, thick and heavy, curling around the stones like fingers. I didn't look back, not once. But as I reached the cabin door, I could still hear her voice, soft, deliberate, repeating my name over and over in the wind. It wasn't angry. It wasn't kind. It just wanted to be remembered. And by the time I locked the door, I realized something that made my stomach drop. She hadn't whispered it from behind me. She'd whispered it from inside my ear. The morning came thin and colorless, the kind of pale gray that feels more like absence than daylight. I hadn't really slept. Every time I drifted off, I'd hear it again, that faint voice, whispering my name like it was inside my head. By dawn, the fog had settled heavy over the cemetery. I stepped outside with my coffee, trying to convince myself that what happened last night was just exhaustion. Hallucination, maybe. Then I saw her, a woman, standing just outside the cemetery gate. She was dressed all in black, not the modern kind either. Her clothes looked dated, like something you'd see in an old mourning photograph. Long skirt, lace collar, gloves the color of soot. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her hair was pinned up tight, though a few strands clung to her cheek like they'd been dampened by fog. Her eyes. That's what got me. They looked hollow, bruised underneath, like she hadn't slept in years. But there was something else too, a strange calmness, as if she'd been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. I called out to her, asked if she was lost. She just looked at me for a few seconds, then said softly, "I came to visit a relative." Her voice didn't match her face. It was too smooth, too controlled. I nodded, out of habit. "Who are you looking for?" "Ann Summers," she said. My blood went cold. It wasn't just the name. It was how she said it, like she already knew I'd recognize it, like she'd been there when I whispered it the night before. I tried to sound casual, to hide the chill crawling up my spine. "I'm sorry," I said, "but there's no record of any Ann Summers buried here." I checked the logs myself. That's when she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide. Too wide. Like her mouth was trying to remember how to mimic the gesture. "Oh," she said softly. "She's there." I frowned. "Ma'am, She tilted her head. "You called her last night." The words hit me like a shove. I didn't move. I couldn't. The coffee cup trembled in my hand. Before I could respond, she stepped toward the gate. The latch was still chained, but she didn't seem to care. She just walked, straight through it. The chain didn't rattle, the gate didn't move. She passed through the iron like it wasn't there. I felt every hair on my arm stand up. I followed her with my eyes as she glided down the main path. The fog parted just slightly around her, trailing like fabric. She moved slow, deliberate, her head turning toward the left side of the graveyard, the old section, right toward the broken stone. I started after her, lantern still burning from the night before, though it barely cut through the mist. I called out again, louder this time. "Ma'am, you can't go back there." She didn't answer, didn't even turn her head. I quickened my pace, boots crunching gravel. The fog grew thicker the closer I got. When I reached the bend near the church, I stopped. The path forked left and right. She was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just fog and silence. I looked down, and that's when I saw them. Two sets of footprints, one mine, the other smaller, barefoot. The second set led straight toward the grave I'd disturbed. When I followed them, my chest tightened. The air smelled strange. Not rot, but something older. Sweet, faintly floral, like pressed lilacs. The grave was different now. The ivy had been cleared away completely, like someone had brushed it back by hand. Lying neatly across the headstone was a single black ribbon tied around a bundle of dead flowers. And written on the ribbon, in faint silver stitching, was one word: remember. I took a step back. My lantern flickered, and for a split second I saw her again, standing behind the stone. Only this time, I saw her face clearly. It wasn't human. Or maybe it was once, but the skin around her mouth looked pulled too tight, and her eyes, they were empty sockets filled with faint gray light. She was smiling again, and then the fog swallowed her whole. I ran. Didn't care about dignity, didn't care about my tools or the gate. I ran straight to the shack and locked myself inside. My chest hurt from breathing too hard. I sat there in the dark, listening. And somewhere out there, faint as wind chimes, I heard her humming. A lullaby. Not angry, not sad, just waiting. When I dared look outside again, the fog had thinned, and the graveyard looked normal. No woman, no flowers, just empty space. But on my table inside the cabin, next to the notebook, lay the same black ribbon, tied in a perfect bow. I didn't bring it in. And that's when I understood what Earl meant when he said the dead here forget they're gone. Sometimes I think they just need someone to remind them. And now, one of them knows my name. I shouldn't have gone back out there that night. Every rule in that notebook told me not to. But after seeing her vanish, after hearing that lullaby float through the fog, I couldn't stop thinking about what was beneath that patch of ground. The lantern's flame wavered as I walked down the path, the cemetery stretching wide and colorless under a paper-thin moon. The air was heavier than it had been the night before, still, but somehow breathing with me. Every time I exhaled, the wind exhaled too. I stopped near the place where she disappeared. The grass was flattened in a perfect circle, like someone had stood there for hours without moving. I set the lantern down, grabbed the shovel, and dug. The dirt came up easy at first, soft from rain and years of neglect. But about 2 feet down, the color changed, went from the gray-brown of topsoil to a slick tar black that clung to the shovel like oil. The smell hit next. Not fresh decay, not death exactly. Something older, sweet and wrong, like honey left to rot in the sun. I kept digging. Every stroke of the shovel sounded louder than it should have, echoing like the ground was hollow underneath. Then metal hit something soft, not wood, not stone, soft. I froze. My hands were shaking, even before I reached down into the hole. The soil was damp, almost warm. My fingers brushed against something smooth, small. I pulled it up, a child's shoe, tiny, white once, now stained black. The sole torn halfway off, the laces fused together with mud. But it wasn't old. The leather was still pliable, still damp. I dropped it, heart hammering. The smell grew stronger, thick, syrupy, like flowers drowned in sugar water. Then I noticed something at the edge of the hole. Footprints, small ones, barefoot. The shape of each toe pressed perfectly into the dirt. They led away from the hole, winding between the graves. But here's the thing. The ground was soft from digging. My boots sank half an inch with every step. Those prints didn't. They sat on top of the dirt, as if whoever made them wasn't heavy enough to disturb it. I lifted the lantern and followed them. The trail curved between the stones, weaving in a slow, deliberate pattern, like someone wandering but knowing exactly where they were going. I counted at least a dozen steps, all small, all too perfect. Then they just stopped. Not faded, not covered, just ended. Right in front of a headstone with no name. I stared at it, the lantern trembling in my hand. The stone was clean, too clean. No moss, no dirt, no age. I crouched to look closer, and that's when I saw the inscription etched faintly into the base. Not carved deep, just scratched with something sharp, recent. "She's still looking." The words shimmered slightly in the lantern light, like the moisture on them hadn't dried yet. Behind me, something moved. A faint shift of air, the sound of dirt loosening. I turned slowly. The hole I dug was gone. The ground was smooth, perfectly level. No sign I'd ever touched it. The shovel was still in my hand, but its blade was clean. No mud, no black soil, nothing. And then, the smell. It flooded back all at once. Sweet, heavy, so thick it made my throat ache. The scent of something rotting beneath perfume. I looked down. The child's shoe wasn't in my pocket anymore. It was lying at my feet again. This time with something small tucked inside it. A wilted flower, white, still dripping wet. I backed away, too afraid to blink, too afraid to breathe. Every shadow between the stones looked like it was bending, stretching, moving closer. I didn't run this time. I just walked backward, keeping my eyes on that spot until the cabin came into view. When I reached the door, I turned the key twice, sat down by the window, and waited for dawn. The smell lingered for hours, sweet and foul. It seeped into my clothes, my hair, my hands. No matter how many times I washed them, it stayed. And when I finally opened the notebook the next morning, I found a new line written in the same pale ink as before. Never dig where they disappear. It wasn't there the day before. I didn't write it. And when I looked out the window, the ground where I dug was perfectly untouched. No hole, no footprints, but in the lantern's faint reflection, I swear I saw her again. Standing at the edge of that empty patch, holding a small shoe in her hand, and smiling. I woke to the sound of pounding, not from outside, but on the cabin door. Earl's voice came through, low and sharp. "Open up." When I did, he was standing there in the gray morning fog, face red, eyes wild. I'd never seen him angry before, just that quiet kind of stern old man patience. But not this time. "You broke the first rule," he barked. I tried to speak, but he cut me off, jabbing a finger toward the hill where the old church stood. "You went digging after dark. Don't you lie to me. The ground knows when it's disturbed." I swallowed hard, the words sticking in my throat. I just wanted to see what she was." "Don't say she," he snapped. The force of it startled me. "You don't call them by name once they start answering." He stepped inside without asking, pacing like a man trying to outwalk his own fear. "You think this place is like other cemeteries? It ain't. That church up there, it's not just for the living. It's the boundary. Keeps the rest quiet." He turned, smoke rising from his breath in the cold. "You ever hear the bell?" I nodded faintly. "Once, a few nights ago." His face went pale. "Then it already knows you." He leaned close, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "That bell only rings when the rules are broken, when someone wakes what's supposed to stay still. You dig where you shouldn't, speak names you shouldn't." He paused, eyes glinting. "The bell calls them home." He stormed out before I could say another word, leaving the door swinging open behind him. His truck engine growled down the dirt road, echoing until it vanished in the fog. I told myself he was losing it, old superstition, small-town paranoia. But part of me believed him, because that night I heard it again. It started faint, so faint I thought I was dreaming. A dull clang rolling down the hill, carried on the wind. Then another, louder, and another, each one heavier than the last, shaking the glass in the window panes. I counted them, 1, 2, 3. By 6, the lantern flame flickered. By 9, the ground began to tremble. The dishes on the shelf rattled. The sound wasn't just loud, it was deep. A vibration that crawled up through the floorboards and settled in my chest. 10, 11. Then the 12th strike hit, and the entire shack seemed to shudder. Dust rained down from the ceiling beams. The sound didn't fade. It hung in the air, humming like a heartbeat. And then, silence. The kind of silence that hurts your ears. I stepped outside, lantern trembling in my hand. The night was too bright, moonlight pressing through thin clouds, fog rolling low like smoke. The cemetery looked endless, every stone gleaming faint silver. Then I saw it. The old church at the top of the hill. The door, the same one that had been boarded shut since the 1970s, was standing wide open. Boards torn clean off, nails scattered like teeth across the grass. I stared for a long time, waiting for something to move, for Earl to appear, for anything. But there was only the bell rope, swaying gently against the tower's frame. No wind, no reason for it. And then, a flicker, inside the church. A faint light, like candle flame, glowing between the cracked boards of the window. It moved slowly, almost like someone walking with a lantern. I stepped closer without realizing it. My boots crunched on gravel that shouldn't have made a sound in that kind of stillness. The bell above gave one last groan, metal grinding on metal. And for just a second, I thought I heard whispering carried on the air. Soft, broken voices layered over each other, rising and falling in rhythm with the wind. I didn't go any closer. Not that night. I just stood there until the light inside the church went out, one flicker at a time, until the only glow left was my own lantern trembling in my grip. When I finally turned back toward the cabin, I noticed something scratched into the dirt by the path, fresh, like someone had dragged their fingers through the soil. 12 for her. I didn't sleep. I sat at the table till dawn, staring at the hill through the window. The door of that church stayed open the whole time, and even as the sun came up, I could still hear the faint echo of that bell in the back of my skull. Slow, steady, as if it was counting something I couldn't yet understand. The fog never really lifted that morning. It just sat over the cemetery like a low ceiling, muting everything. Sound, color, even the light. The kind of gray that makes you forget what direction the sun should rise from. I walked the grounds just after dawn, shovel in one hand, notebook in the other, trying to keep myself busy. I thought work might steady me. Raking, trimming, checking the gates. But the moment I stepped past the first row of stones, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavier than usual, like it was pressing back against me. The birds that usually perched on the wire fence weren't there. Not one. Even the crows had left. I followed the main path, boots sinking into soft earth. My eyes kept drifting toward the church on the hill, the one that had stood open all night. I told myself I'd check it later. But something else caught my eye first. A new stone. It wasn't there the day before. I was sure of it. The ground around it was fresh, the soil darker, like it had just been turned. I stopped a few feet away, staring. The headstone was clean, no moss, no ivy. Smooth granite, polished enough to catch the dim light. The name etched across the top made my stomach drop. My name. First, middle, last. Every letter carved perfectly. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. The date of birth was right too, down to the day. But the death date, blank. Just a long dash waiting to be filled. My throat went dry. I stepped closer. The closer I got, the colder it felt, like standing in front of an open freezer. My breath fogged the air. Then I saw the inscription beneath my name. Small, precise letters chiseled into the stone's base. He didn't listen. The words hit like a nail to the chest. I dropped to my knees, hands shaking. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. I ran my fingers over the letters. The stone was cold, unnaturally cold. I tried to dig around it, thinking maybe someone was playing a cruel joke. But the soil underneath wasn't loose. It was packed hard, dense, like the earth itself had grown around it overnight. I hit the stone once with a shovel. The clang rang through the still air, sharp and hollow. I hit it again, harder. A thin crack formed across the surface. That's when I saw it. Something dark seeped through the split. At first, I thought it was water, but it was too thick. It oozed slowly, glistening like oil, and it smelled wrong, metallic and sweet, like rotting flowers soaked in iron. The black liquid slid down the face of the stone, pooling near my boots. The ground hissed where it touched, the grass curling into ash. I stumbled back, dropping the shovel. The crack widened, the sound low and wet, like stone breathing. Then, something inside shifted. For a heartbeat, I saw it, a reflection in that black fluid. My own face, but not mine. The eyes were hollow, the mouth smiling. And behind that reflection, faint but clear, another shape, a woman's silhouette. The same one I'd seen vanish near the graves. The air around me started to hum, faint at first, then stronger. The ground trembled beneath my knees. I could hear whispers now. Too many voices to count, overlapping, murmuring in tones that sounded like grief and laughter all at once. I turned to run, but the earth moved with me. Each step sank deeper, the soil grabbing at my boots like hands. When I looked back one last time, the stone wasn't cracked anymore. It was whole again. Only one thing had changed. The death date had been filled in. Not tomorrow, not yesterday. Today's date. The whispering stopped. Everything went still, so still it hurt. I backed away until I reached the cabin, heart hammering, lungs tight. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, sweat freezing on my skin. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. On the table, the notebook lay open. A new line had been written inside, scrawled in dark, wet ink that hadn't been there before. Every keeper gets his stone. I didn't write it. I looked at my hands. They were smeared with black, the same oily residue from the grave. I tried to wipe it off, but it wouldn't come clean. The smell of it followed me, thick and sweet, until I thought I'd choke. And when I looked at the mirror nailed above the wash basin, I realized why. There was something behind me in the reflection. A woman, pale face, hollow eyes, her mouth close to my ear, whispering my name. The knock came just after midnight. Soft at first, 3 short raps on the cabin door. I froze. I hadn't heard a truck pull up, and Earl never came this late. When I opened the door, he was standing there in the lantern glow. His skin looked pale, waxy even, and his hands were trembling like he'd been out in the cold too long. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped right inside and shut the door behind him. "You've stirred him up too much," he said, voice low, unsteady. "You shouldn't have dug. You shouldn't have called her." I swallowed hard. "Earl, what's happening to this place?" He stared at me like he didn't even hear the question, just pacing in that slow, jerky way that made the floorboards creak. Then he stopped and looked straight at me. "There's one last rule I didn't write down," he said. "Didn't think I'd need to. Not until you." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a silver key, old and tarnished, the teeth worn smooth from years of use. He pressed it into my hand. "Lock the gate before dawn," he whispered. "If you don't, they'll follow you home." The key was cold, colder than metal should have been. I looked down at it, then back at him. "Who'll follow me?" He didn't answer, just stared toward the window, where the fog pressed thick against the glass. "The ones that remember their names," he said softly, "and the one you gave hers back." The air in the room felt heavy again, too heavy. The lantern light dimmed for no reason at all, flickering weakly against the walls. "Earl," I said, "you need to tell me what's going on. What's out there?" He turned toward me slowly, his jaw trembling. "You need to run when you hear the bell," he muttered. "Don't wait for it to finish. Don't let it reach 12. If it does..." He stopped mid-sentence, eyes darting toward the door. I heard it too then. Something faint, distant. A low hum, almost like singing, carried through the fog. "Is that the wind?" I asked. Earl shook his head. "That's not wind." The humming grew louder, soft, layered voices, all blending together in a single mournful tone. I could feel it in my chest, like it was vibrating through the floorboards. Then, suddenly, he went still. "Earl?" I said. No answer. He was facing the door now, shoulders rigid. I stepped closer, the lantern shaking in my hand. "Earl," I whispered again. He turned, and in the shifting light, I saw that it wasn't him anymore. The face that looked back at me was pale, too pale. The eyes were darker than they should have been, and the mouth was smiling, wide and wrong. It was her, the woman in black. Her dress shimmered like smoke under the lantern light, her skin almost translucent. She held that same expression, polite, calm, like she'd been waiting for me to realize. The key slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a dull clink. She stepped closer, one slow movement at a time. The air went cold enough to burn. "Did you really think you could bury her twice?" she whispered. Her voice was soft, but it filled the whole room. Every shadow stretched toward her, pulling along the floorboards like spilled ink. I stumbled backward until I hit the wall. My breath came out in clouds. "What do you want?" I managed to say. She tilted her head slightly, that impossible smile never fading. "You called my name," she said. "Now it's your turn." The lantern flickered once, then went out completely. For a second, I could still see her in the dark, her outline glowing faintly, her hand lifting toward my face. Then, silence. When the light came back, she was gone. The room was empty, except for the key lying at my feet. Only, it wasn't silver anymore. It was black, wet, like it had been pulled from the ground. And carved into the wooden floor where she'd stood were 3 words burned deep into the grain. "Lock it. Now." I didn't think. I ran. Down the path, through the fog, key in hand. The gate loomed ahead, wide open, chain unhooked, the wind dead still. I jammed the key into the lock and turned it. The click echoed through the whole cemetery. And somewhere behind me, near the church, the bell started to ring. Once, twice, 3 times, but I didn't turn around. I ran until I hit the road, and I didn't stop running, because Earl had been right about one thing. If you don't lock the gate before dawn, they follow you home. Morning always comes late here. The sun rises everywhere else first, then drags itself over Stull like it's reluctant to touch the place. The fog never really leaves. It just thins enough to let you think the world is still normal. I still work here. Or maybe stay is the better word. Days pass, weeks maybe. Time's different out here. The seasons change, but the air doesn't. Still heavy, still humming. I haven't seen Earl since that night. His truck's gone. The gate key, the real one, the silver one he gave me, still hangs on the nail by the door. I don't remember putting it there, but it's always waiting when I wake up. Every morning it's cold to the touch, no matter how warm the room gets. Sometimes, though, I hear him, not clearly, just faint hums under the wind, old country songs, the kind that don't belong to any station. Sometimes it's a whisper right outside the window, just a few syllables that sound like my name drawn out long. Other nights, I'll be walking the rows, checking the stones, and I'll hear boots behind me. Slow, steady, dragging through the gravel. When I turn, no one's there, just the fog curling where the path should be. But the air changes when he's close. It gets colder, sharper, almost respectful, like the place itself pauses to listen. The shed's still there too, though it looks older than I remember. The wood's gone soft and the roof's sagging, but when I open the door, it's clean inside. Tools lined up neatly, floors swept, lamp still burning low. Sometimes I catch the smell of pipe smoke, and I swear I can hear him humming. The notebook sits on the table now, the same cracked leather one Earl gave me. only it's thicker. Heavier. The pages I remember are still there, written in his hand. But new ones keep showing up. Blank one day, full the next. Some in handwriting that looks like mine, others not at all. I started adding to it. Rules he never mentioned. Things I learned the hard way. I don't know why I keep writing them. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's the only thing keeping the place quiet. The last one I added was yesterday morning. I found it written on a scrap of paper tucked under the gate latch. Words in fresh ink, still wet. I copied it into the notebook before the paper dissolved in the dew. Rule Number 13. If you ever take this job, don't. I stared at it for a long time before adding the last line in my own hand. The cemetery doesn't need another keeper. It already has one. The truth is, I don't remember the last time I left these grounds. I've tried. Packed my bag once, drove to the edge of the road. But when I blinked, I was back at the gate. Engine still running. Same fog, same sound of the bell echoing low from the hill. There's no road out anymore, just the path that circles back. Sometimes I think about the first night, when I thought all this was just small-town superstition. Now I know better. The rules aren't warnings, they're anchors. They keep this place from spilling over. And when Earl said the ground takes what it's owed, I think I finally understand what he meant. Because every keeper who comes here ends up part of it. We don't quit, we don't retire, we just stay. The graves don't need tending anymore, the grass doesn't grow, and the stones don't weather. Everything here is still, perfectly still. Except the bell. It rings every so often, low and far away, like it's testing the air, checking that I'm still listening. I keep the key on me now. I lock the gate every morning before dawn, even though no one ever comes. And when I walk past the stone with my name on it, I stop and wait a moment. Because lately, there's a second name appearing beneath mine. The letters form slow, like they're being written from the inside. It's faint now, but it's getting clearer. And I think, no, I know, it's Earl's. He's still here. And now, so am I. So if you ever find yourself in Douglas County and you come across a rusted iron gate that says Stull Cemetery, Esther's 1857, do yourself a favor. Keep driving, because this place doesn't want another keeper, and it sure as hell doesn't let the last one leave.